more prospect stuff. This is going to be an unpopular one, but maybe a popular one because we are going to begin our major prospect previews. So we might revisit some guys. We might be doing some guys, their profiles for the first time, but we are not only going to be talking about them as draft eligible players and their profiles. We are also going to be talking about how this fits in as a Detroit Red Wings pick, where they would fit in the organization, the likelihood of it, how we feel about them being picked, so on and so forth. So from now up until the draft, which is a month away, each episode will be highlighting a player who could, by all rights, be a Detroit Red Wings draft pick.
At number 4 specifically.
This is the big one. This is the big shebang. So we're going to start with the most unpopular one, I think, just to kind of get it out of the way. And even though I gave it that qualifier, people are inevitably going to yell at us, and I'd rather try to avoid that. So let's rip off the Band-Aid. Defenseman Jake Sanderson as a possible Detroit Red Wings 4th overall pick. Brad, you lead the charge.
So first thing about how we're going to be doing this, if everybody follows everybody we're going to track over the next month about who could be a Detroit pick, we are eliminating all options, which means someone else who we don't cover is going to get picked like last year.
It's Emile Andre.
So if you're like Team Anton Lundell, you're going to like us. But yeah, Jake Sanderson. So I don't think it's a secret. There's not many Red Wings fans out there who would be happy with this pick, but whether we want to admit it or not, there's a higher percentage of it happening than we think, strictly because of what happened with Mo Seider last year. If nothing else, Mo Seider last year shows 2 things. One, Yzerman's not afraid to go off the board, and he likes those big, defensive, excellent skating defensemen. You could make an argument that Jake Sanderson's a better skater than Mo Seider. I don't know if I would make it, but he's in the conversation. And Jake Sanderson probably has better offensive upside than Mo Seider does, although I don't think he is as good defensively. But again, all things are in the range of each other. So, and he shoots left. So you could literally put him on a pairing with Mo Seider and have like your shutdown pair for the next 15 years if you wanted. But here's the thing. He's not good enough to go 4th overall. That's just the reality of it in my mind. There's way better options. Sanderson's a fine player. If you like Mo Seider, there is literally no reason you shouldn't like Jake Sanderson. The only reason you shouldn't like Jake Sanderson is because he's not a value pick at 4th overall. And he's not. He's not in my top 10 at the moment. So this is what it is. I didn't have Mo Seider in my top 15 last year, so we've been proven wrong before, and hey, if it happens, maybe we're proven wrong again. But there's a lot to like about the guy. He is an excellent defender. He is an excellent skater. He is a smart hockey player. I would say he's got very limited offensive upside, but for about a month or 2 before the shutdown, he was really showing some things in the offensive zone. Mind you, he's playing against juniors. Mo Seider never did for a full season. So again, not exactly apples to apples. But we have to consider the fact that this guy is right up Yzerman's alley.
Jake Sanderson is a good player. Like, he's a good player, and we very well could be looking at a universe where, let's say Yzerman didn't pick Mo Seider 6th last year. He took Trevor Zegras. And this year is when he went off the board for the supremely talented defensive defenseman with maybe an untapped offensive upside who is a good skater as well. That's legitimately the exact same mold as Mo Seider, but on the left side. So there's a good question to be asked here by proponents for Jake Sanderson to say, well, if we can be accepting of Mo Seider as the pick eventually, why couldn't we do the same for Jake Sanderson? And here's my answer to that. And I think I don't want to speak for Evan, and we'll get to him in a minute here, but I think the general consensus, at least among Red Wings fans, is that Jake Sanderson isn't the preferred pick here. And I think you do have to factor Mo Seider in. Steve Yzerman took a huge risk when he passed on the offensive talent that was available at pick 6 last year to take Mo Seider. He identified the Red Wings' need for an all-around capable defenseman, a guy who can just do everything. And that's what they're hoping Mo Seider is going to be. And that's what he's looking like he has a good chance to be as well. Was it my favorite pick? No. Absolutely not. Do I still think now that Trevor Zegras could likely be the better player? Yeah, absolutely. But I have a hard time getting mad at a player who can do what Mo Seider looks like he can do on the ice. I don't know if I can do that again, right? Like, I don't know if I can be willing to make that leap again. Yes, he's a great skater. Yes, he's a great defender with awesome defensive instincts, he's a very mature defender, and that's hard to find in a defenseman. And yeah, he is perfectly capable offensively. He makes a good first pass. He has a good eye for that side of the ice, but he's not a dynamic offensive defenseman like you see in Jamie Drysdale. And I think that's what sets Drysdale apart as the premier defensive pick at the top of this draft. I've had some people ask me like, "Oh, what's the difference between the two? I thought you were a defensive defenseman guy." I am. I play defense. I really value when people pick defensemen who can actually play the position.
Scratch that one off your bingo cards, everyone.
I made a mistake trying to go after Brad. Now Evan's going to strike at me because I'm vulnerable. He shook me. I don't think that it is. I just don't think it's the right move to leave that much offensive talent on the board again. I don't think he's good enough for a 4th overall pick. I would have thought the same thing about Mo Seider last year, but there's only so many times you can take that risk in my mind. And especially in this draft, like you're looking at, correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but I view this as the amount of talent that will be on the board at number 4 is as if Turcotte had fell to number 6 last year.
I like everybody ranked, at least on my own personal rankings, 8 or higher more than I liked Turcotte at this point last year. Like that's
I loved Turcotte last year.
And I did too. And that's how good this draft is to me. I don't think Turcotte's in the tier of Rossi, Raymond, Stützle, maybe not even Holtz or Perfetti, truthfully. I think those last two is pretty close, but I would not be surprised if in a redraft and you threw him in here, he goes close to 10. That's just the way it is. But the one thing too that we have to look back on is interviews with Yzerman about last year's draft. He said that there were a couple guys they wanted, but unfortunately the top 5 went as he expected, which makes me think that as much as he likes Seider, if Turcotte or Doc had fallen, he would have drafted them. So it's not like he went into that draft and said, we are taking a defenseman. He liked his guy. Would he have picked a forward if Turcotte or Doc was there? Yeah, maybe. And who knows what conversation we're having right now. But that was when he was picking outside the top 5. Now he's picking inside the top 5, which it's only 2 spots, but it's a stronger forward draft and it is in the top 10. So 2 spots is a lot. So even though Yzerman likes his defensive defenseman, even though Jake Sanderson's probably going to be a very good player, even though it's still within the realm of possibility, I have a hard time seeing it happening this year. But we got to examine this. What if he does it? What are the benefits here? Well, the benefits are the left side of Detroit's defense is a mess and the system doesn't have a ton coming through. I'm still on the Cholowski train. I still think there's an NHL defenseman there. Albert Johansson, as Yoki was saying, looks like he's got top 4 upside. McIsaac, maybe. But here's the thing with all 3 of them. Those are all big maybes. If you get Jake Sanderson in there, he's probably more of a certainty than any of those 3. So then you do get some balance on the blue line, and that would be a huge benefit to the Red Wings going forward.
What else to add? Yeah, I think if you want to look at like comparing Jamie Drysdale to Jake Sanderson, Jamie Drysdale kind of plays that more like rover style defense where he's he does play defense, but he definitely roams into the offensive zone. You'll see him below the net quite often, whereas Jake Sanderson kind of plays that more traditional offense for a defenseman. You know, he mans the point. He keeps pucks low and gets them onto the net. He's got an okay shot. It's not a bomb by any means, but you know, and he looks like he could potentially, you know, power play a quarterback at power play at the NHL level. And I think he's exceeded a lot of expectations that people had for him. And I think if he, you know, adds a little bit of size, because I think he's only like 180 pounds. It's pretty small for a defenseman in the NHL. and he just continues to grow. I think like the very bottom for him is like a top 4 defenseman on a team. That being said, do I want him at number 4? I would be shocked. I'd be very, very shocked, because I think the pulse of this draft is very deep forwards. Someone's going to balk and get the second defenseman very early. And obviously Yzerman would be aware of that. So I don't think he's target number 1 for Detroit, but after last year, who even knows anymore? I really do like Jake Sanderson, and whoever drafts him, I think he's going to go a lot. He probably will go in the top 10, I think.
Yeah.
They're getting a very high quality prospect who's going to be in the NHL in 1 to 2 years, I think.
Well, it's going to be interesting, because if the rumor, like, every team in the top 5 is linked to a prospect at each pick. So if those rumors are true, we pretty much have a pretty good idea of how the top 5 is going to go. And that would include 0 defensemen at this moment. And then you have Anaheim, New Jersey, Buffalo picking all teams that could use defensemen. So there's a reality where there's 0 defensemen in the top 5, but 2 in the top 7. That might very well happen.
Yeah, GMs are just always horned up for those like blue collar, hardworking with a potential offensive upside defenseman. Like Jake Sanderson will have a massive lineup of teams who want him.
And I know I mentioned it in our mock draft, but I'll repeat it there. There's where Jake Sanderson is going in this draft. His floor is Winnipeg. I cannot see him getting past them.
What is Winnipeg draft at?
10 or 11, I think.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. If I'm the Red Wings and we're in that spot, I'd be thrilled with Jake Sanderson. Of course, he'd want, let's say the Red Wings had a better year than they did, and they were drafting like 10th or 11th, and let's say every ideal offensive piece was off the board. Jake Sanderson was probably who I'd be gunning for in terms of who's realistically there, or I might be one of the people pushing for Askarov in that range. He's like Evan said, I don't see him being a bad player, and I don't see him having a likelihood of busting out unless his defensive abilities completely fall apart at the NHL level. If you're looking at a Seider Sanderson or a Hronek Sanderson top pairing, like, oh shit, that's a force to be reckoned with in terms of overall potential. But the reality is that's not where Detroit's picking. Yeah. The reality is there's too many offensive pieces there.
We're too high in the draft order to go after a Jake Sanderson.
And even though I already pointed out that there is room for improvement on Detroit's left side, like in the system and on the actual team, I will still argue there's much bigger needs at forward right now.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. Yeah. Like, defensive ability is not easy to buy. For sure, there's actually a premium on that, but if you're a team with way, way, way too many holes, you need to fill in the most important pieces first, and that starts with scoring goals and winning games.
I would much prefer us to take Jamie Drysdale, who we know can drive offense 100%. And play it. We can round out his defensive game.
100%. Yeah, completely agree. And it's bad because we're coming out harsh on Sanderson, and it's not about him at all. It's about context of the team. I've come around on him a lot as a top 10 pick. I used to think it would be a bigger reach for a team, but watching his game more and more, I think that people are just a little bit slow to recognize what he could bring. I don't see him as having a huge offensive upside, although I do really, really value a complete game, and I think that's what he has. Couple that with great skating. Yeah, team in the top 10, go for it. Would never blame you. My preference at number 4, 0. The likelihood at number 4, I would call it minimal, like lowest tier likelihood of the reasonable picks in my mind.
I still will argue, though, that there might not be a prospect in this draft who got hurt by the shutdown more than Sanderson, though, because he was really coming on as everything shut down. So if he was at the Five Nations tournament over in Europe for U18 players, he led the tournament in scoring, not as a not for defensemen, like overall, he led the tournament in scoring. He had the huge top prospects game in the States, and again, his offensive game was coming around. So if we had an extra 2 months of the season and we had the end of year U18 Worlds, we might not be balking at him at number 4 at this point if he continued the trajectory he was on. Is that likely? No, but you just don't know. And that's what makes this draft more than most way more unpredictable. Like we sit here preaching, oh yeah, I got my top 4 set. I've got my top 8 set. We don't know shit because of all the video scouting that has to go on, because of the shutdown, because of the inconclusives, I'm not even, I'm too tired to talk.
Inconclusive?
There we go. But whatever. I'm not ruling anything out at this possibility. I'm not ruling out Jake Sanderson going to 3 to Ottawa at this point, honestly. Not betting on it, but I'm not ruling it out.
And he's from Whitefish, Montana. Hell of a town. Nasty hangover from there.
You actually been to Whitefish, Montana?
It's beautiful. I 100% recommend going there.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockey Town Evan.